All right. Welcome to EIPIP meeting. I'm Pooja Ranjan, and I have shared the agenda on the chat. So the first item is splitting out EIP repos into EIPs and ERCs. There is a link which we can follow. This item was discussed in the previous meeting, and Hudson created an issue for this where he kind of summarized discussions so far. Micah further added goal and potential solutions and major roadblocker for today's discussion that we would like to resolve. So the goal mentioned there is a separate notification system for ERC editors and subscribers and EIP editors. Potential solution, separate GitHub repositories that we discussed in the earlier meeting. So people can watch on the only one repository or both if they would like to. The problem that we discussed was a numbering system. So I'm trying to open the floor for any other comment or suggestion. Can we just start from the goal, like how to separate, or do we actually want to, is there any other way for separating notification system? So if we take yeah, please go ahead, Micah.
I was just going to say my preference still is weekly and just allowing for duplicate numbers across the systems.
I think my preference, sorry, let me mute my phone. My preference is, so when you say duplicate numbers, you mean like having an ERC1, like starting there?
Yeah, so start with ERC1, and we might, very unlikely, but we might end up with an ERC that has the same number as an EIP.
So what about people who do naming conventions where, because like ERC20 is technically EIP20. And like
yes.
There's some EIPs that are ERCs but are not referred to as ERCs, but they are ERCs.
So we don't have to worry about collisions the other direction because the EIPs started out way ahead. Well, we don't have to worry about collisions the other direction anytime soon because the EIPs are already up to like, what is it, 3,500 or something. And so it'll be a while before ERCs catch up, assuming they do. I don't, and when they do catch up, they will be called ERCs, not EIPs, because we'll have a separate repo and a separate process, whatever. And so I'm not too worried about that particular problem. I think the counter argument against just allowing for duplicates was people are worried that there will be user confusion.
Yeah, that was something
with the whole like early numbers are considered older, and so ERC5 people will give undue weight to because, oh, it's got a low number, it must be really old.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I think we should just pick a mid number, or starting at a certain like 3,000 whatever, and just go up from there where there's ERCs and EIPs separate and they can overlap. I think that'd be my solution.
If we want to do that, I think we would need to either come up with a new mechanism for choosing numbers, which is fine, or someone write a script that will burn through issue number 1 through 3,500 in the ERC repo.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't really have an answer to how to do the numbering system across both.
So in the
It
last,
wouldn't be too hard to burn through all the numbers, I don't think. I don't think you get rate limited. So you can take a day or two on a script.
So I was wondering, like in the last meeting, we also discussed about, having a separate repo for ERC, but opening, just issue section in the EIP repo so that we do not have the overlap and we do not have to go back to number 1. I was wondering, do we find any issue with this proposal? Like maybe to implement this, my recommendation would be to discourage people from using issues of EIP repo to open it for EIP discussion. And like as we were also encouraging people to open an issue in the Fellowship of Ethereum Magician. So we will, going forward, maybe we will keep the issue section only for ERCs to grab a number. That way we will never be in conflict with the EIP number, and we will not disturb whatever has been done till date, like whatever ERCs or EIPs were there, we will not be disturbing that. Do people have a strong
that would not resolve it would not resolve our problem of subscriptions, because you generally subscribe to a whole GitHub repo, or at least I do. I don't think you can subscribe to just issues or just PRs. Like you subscribe to the repo or not.
Ah, I got it.
I think the easiest is if we're okay with eventually having duplicate numbers at some point, but we just want to not have low numbered ERCs for historic reasons. I think just writing a script that burns through issue number 1 through 3500 on the ERCs repo is probably the easiest, and it sounds like it satisfies most people. The biggest problem there is finding someone to write it. Maybe we can get Alita to do it. She sounds interested in picking up some work. Pretty easy script to write. And it wouldn't require us to come up with a new numbering system. Can now?
Okay, sorry, my mic wasn't working. I still really feel like we should not have conflicts between EIPs and ERCs. And I'm not, tied to one certain way of doing that. I think the two ways that we talked about are a spreadsheet or something, some central source, or we could have another repository where you create an issue to get a number. And then that way, that always is happening sequentially. And then they just post a link to say, hey, I requested my number here. This is my number.
Can you give a short reminder on why you don't want duplicates across?
I think that people generally use, refer to their EIPs and ERCs by their number, and there are many famous numbers, and it would be bad to have an ERC 1559 or, an ERC 2718. And, as editors, sure, we can kind of try to avoid those things from happening, but I just don't think that that's, a really good solution for what we want. I think like long-term even, this may be crazy, but I kind of think we can really move away from EIPs. I actually thought about this last couple of weeks. I don't think EIPs themselves actually make much sense. And so then we would just kind of be stuck with ERCs, and then we wouldn't have this issue of numbering as much.
Oh, I like the idea of just getting rid of EIPs. That'll solve all of our problems.
I've talked to some people about this, and to me, we kind of like, modeled off how Bitcoin did it, and Bitcoin kind of modeled it around like, how PEP and RFCs did it. And the thing is that, for PEP and RFCs, there kind of isn't like, RFCs especially, there isn't one canonical internet. There's lots of different implementations of many different protocols, and it's not a requirement to have to implement, this certain version of HTTP. There's many versions that you can support, and there's, different things you can do. But for Ethereum, there's one Ethereum. And so it doesn't, in my mind, make a lot of sense to have lots of EIPs that you kind of like understand in a piecewise fashion. There should just be a single specification that you understand as one unit. And I think like on the longer term, that would be a much better way of going about proposing network changes if we're putting PRs against the specification. And I think this is exactly what ETH2 is kind of doing.
Yeah, you have my vote. The hard thing I think is going to be convincing, like migrating everything to that and getting the initial specification up. Like, I mean, that's probably half a year to a year of work just to get the initial spec.
Yeah. I think, it's something just to kind of keep in mind. There's someone who I believe is going to be working on a spec in the not too distant future for some other reasons. And I think it's going to be, the most comprehensive spec of Ethereum, more comprehensive maybe than even the yellow paper. And I think that, and that's going to be written in like a Python or something simple like language. And I think that's something that we could use as the, canonical spec at some point. But it's not something that we had to do today.
So if I understand this correctly, you're saying that the decisions we make here don't matter long term, so it's okay if we take on some short-term technical debt, because your belief is that technical debt will just kind of be deleted when we move to that. Is that correct?
Yeah, and explicitly, the technical debt is that we are coordinating two numbering schemes to make sure that they're sequential. And I think that long term, we're going to go back to having one scheme anyways. And so in the interim, I don't think that is a huge issue to deal with. If anything, it might catalyze the effort to get away from EIPs altogether.
So if I understand this correct, like the suggestion of separating the repo, we want to keep it on hold for some time, and as you're expecting somebody to start working on it, and then we will have a better picture of it.
I don't think we want to keep it on hold. I think, like Lance was saying, that eventually the EIP's current EIP process will probably change if we all get our way.
Okay.
But until that happens, we would still like to have ERCs and EIPs split apart, I believe. At least I would.
So do we think that Alita's help could be useful to deal with them in the meantime?
Yeah, so from given engineering resources, there are a number of solutions to this. So one is just to make if there's a bot on both repos, it just checks for collisions, like as part of the merge process, just to make sure we don't merge collisions. That's one way. Another way is a tiny little web app that runs somewhere.
Did we lose Micah?
Did I lose him or?
Yeah, no, I
Who's
can't hear
Micah, you
Mike if he's talking.
Oh, he's back. He's cutting in and out.
You guys can't hear me?
I can
I
hear
hear
you.
you now.
Okay. What did you guys get?
Unfortunately not. If you can repeat, like.
Yeah, none of it.
And you're
Let me
still breaking
reconnect.
out too.
Sorry about that. Can you guys hear me now?
I can hear you now.
So far,
Well, I missed anything before now.
Yeah.
So it's basically saying, given engineering resources, there are a number of solutions to this problem. One would be to have a merge bot sitting on both the ERC repo and the IP repo that just makes sure anytime there's, like, you assign a number just like normal, and if there's a conflict, the bot will tell you and you can give another one. So that's a simple solution that if we have engineering resources to spend. Another one, a little tiny web app that just gives out numbers, and we can just ask it for a number via some mechanism. Maybe only editors of the two repos can do so. So that way someone just doesn't click the button over and over again. So yeah, I think the problem is easier if we have engineering resources allocated to it.
It usually is.
Yeah, that's generally how the world works, right?
I agree though.
Yeah, I think for this, if there is a solution, and I know Alita is available and she showed her interest in working towards it. So if this is something that we think of like a priority, I think the cat herders would be happy to fund this thing and get it fixed for the solution we need for the time being, till like maybe before March, whatever the EIP process we are following. So is it something that we should consider now?
Yeah, I don't actually care that much about how the numbers are picked. I have, like I said, my preference is very weak. I would rather just get things moving than spend another 2 weeks debating it. So whatever people want, whatever gets the ball rolling.
How comfortable Light Client and Micah, you both would be if we have Alita allocated for this job, and she can get in touch with you, get the requirement, and try to resolve the situation?
I'm fine with it.
Same.
Sounds good. So unfortunately, she is not here. She mentioned in the Discord that she may not be able to make the call, but she also mentioned that she would be interested to help out with. So I'll be having a word with her, and maybe then we can start looking into it. Anything more on this topic before we move on to the next item? Yeah, I think one last thing I have, I just want to make a quick mention of that, that we are working on securing funding for EIP and ERC editors as well. Like we mentioned earlier that it would be helpful to hire more people, but funding was an issue. Now we are looking into that aspect. Maybe if not in this meeting, maybe in the next meeting, if we could discuss an estimate of how much funds would be needed for 3 to 6 months, that would be helpful for us, the cat herders, to talk to sponsors and arrange that.
I think it depends on how high quality of editors you want.
And I'm expecting the present editors' input for this, because I think those people can give us a fair idea, and we would be just people to arrange resources and funds.
Quick note before we close out this topic, someone should probably look at the ERCs. I've been auto-archiving them per our last conversation, and they're starting. I have noticed they're starting to pile up.
Yeah, I'm planning to do that soon.
Okay.
I fractured my thumb about 2 weeks ago, and unfortunately that has caused, delays in reviewing EIPs.
Are you one-handed right now?
I've got full range of motion in my fingers, but I've had to buy a split keyboard and tilt it so that I can type for more than a couple hours at a time.
It's no good.
You could just get a saw and cut off half your space bar, and then lay your thumb in the gap.
There we go.
Okay. So if that's it on this item, we'll discuss further in the next meeting about the next steps that we kind of agreed upon in this meeting. Moving on to the next item, it's a JSON RPC API spec support needed for coordination and funding. A couple of weeks ago, we organized PEEP and EIP for EIP 1474 JSON RPC spec. There we realized that such spec need not to be following the standard EIP standardization process and should not live on EIP repo necessarily. In the last meeting, we came up that we should have a placeholder for these kind of spec, maybe on ETH1 spec or somewhere else. Tomas has been leading the JSON RPC spec calls, where all parties joined to discuss this standard spec. And in the last meeting, as well as in the JSON RPC's last meeting, it was discussed to make ETH1.o repository the placeholder for these specs. Thanks to Tomas for joining us today to discuss how we can provide support that is needed for this task to move forward. Unfortunately, I don't see Eric and Sam Richards, the other two participants who we have contacted for this issue. Tomas, would you like to go ahead with the summary that you have mentioned in the comment for reference?
Hi, yeah, thanks for invitation, and I'll be happy to share some summary of the last 2 or 3 months of calls with the various teams, including the client developers, the library implementers, like the libraries, integration libraries implementers, the tooling implementers, and so on. So we started by analyzing whether JSON RPC API should be more of a change and suggestion of changes or simply a spec of existing thing. And there is a very clear agreement that what we care about is the spec, and to deliver the very detailed information about all the mostly used JSON RPC items. And one important outcome of this calls was that we no longer would like to approach it from the perspective of the entire JSON RPC or modules, because that's the level of view where the most differences appear that are not necessarily differences that cause trouble to the user. So like if you think of the entire module that has 20 or in some cases 30 different endpoints, it might be that not all of those endpoints are critical or standardized, and they don't have to be. But if we look at single endpoint like ETH block number or ETH call, those are widely used, implemented in all the clients, and this is where on the low level the specification is missing. And our initial view was that some way of specifying each of those endpoints separately in a most formal and Ethereum style way would be good. And we picked EIP process as the way to go. However, recently I was suggested on those calls that within EIP calls, you had the vision of moving this to the spec repositories for Ethereum 1 and potentially Ethereum 2. And this is totally fine. And if you're asking about the support, I think that all those people that are willing to work on actual spec, preparing the details of endpoints and finding out those edge cases and describing them would benefit from some help on just arranging that properly and organizing that within repository that would follow the style of specification that you picked for all the other items within Ethereum. So like the exact form is not the most important for us. What we would like to achieve is ensuring that it's complete on each endpoint level and that every single endpoint is separate. So that we do not have the spec, which is a single document for all the endpoints. That is not a spec that is separate document for each module, but it's actually a spec where you can clearly separate and independently edit every single endpoint within JSON RPC. Again, explaining that by endpoint, we mean here, I think like a single method, ETH block number with different potential parameter setups. Of the modules that are in question, so the ETH module is the one for which the endpoints are the mostly used and most important, and where we can get some immediate gains by just simply specifying one by one some of those, like block number, like call, estimate gas, the ones that are used over and over, that because of their complexity and wide usage and many different users asking for additional functionality, improvements, changes, they ended up being slightly different in different clients. And what else? So one more outcome of those conversations was that we do want to have some technical way of describing, formal way of describing those EIPs as well, something that would at least define the interfaces in a way that allows for automatic code generation or automatic verification of the API being implemented by the given client or not. And that's where there was wide agreement that OpenRPC format can be reused. This is something that was initially created within the domain of Ethereum Classic. And I believe that Zachary Belford is ready to help here with writing this part of the spec. So we think that every single endpoint will be the description that will define what clients do now, and if there are any discrepancies, I will suggest how they should be resolved. But also there will be a technical part which will say, oh, this is the formal spec following the OpenRPC standard that you can use to write tools, to generate tools. Then also, I know that Ethereum.org wanted to be hosting that information. So that would be great if that's automated in some way. So this info is not, over time, it's not being outdated on any of the sites, whether it's spec or Ethereum.org. And also when thinking about EIP 1474, which was like the first, probably the most successful attempt so far to do JSON RPC specification, that one is approaching JSON RPC as the whole, but it also provides all those basics of explaining what the types like quantity or block number, block ref, and so on data are. So we still need the basis. So we'll still need to explain those basic repeatedly used types. And we think that maybe something like that can be introduced almost like both as a basis that those endpoint specific documents can refer to, but also something that in the end can actually gather the links to all of those endpoints and create a way to navigate between them. So while we say this, we don't want to create a single document, but we actually, after creating many documents, we want to create one list of like references, links to all of those. And I think that's it really.
So I was looking into some conversation on the Discord channel, and there was this mention of creating a folder in the ETH1 spec repo. So how do you guys want to, proceed in that direction? Like getting access to that is okay, or is there a defined group who would be reviewing the PR and we can manage it on our end? Do you have any thoughts on that part?
I think this part we don't have very formally specified. So I think that there should be reviewers for each of those, and that it should include at least all the client developers saying, developers from all the clients represented and saying, oh yeah, this is correct as for the current state of things. Whether they should be formally having access to that repo or just simply submitting PRs and making comments via standard GitHub interfaces, it's an open question. I think you might be in a better place to make those decisions and suggest us something that would work best based on your experience.
I think having a finite number of editors who are just familiar with the process is valuable. It keeps people from accidentally merging or thinking they've gone through the process correctly and then they just merge and it's too soon or there was an agreement. So my recommendation is have a core group who are most familiar with the intended process that have merge rights, and everybody else just operates on PRs.
Yeah, so I think that we would like to suggest on one or two people that would be actually writing the spec. If you think that you can, that you have someone that you can suggest for that role. So Eric suggested Zachary. I'm not sure if that's, I assume that's with Zachary's knowledge. That's how it sounded in the email. And if there can be one more person involved in actual writing and writing the spec and contacting people, then I'll be very happily helping to just get connected to all the client teams, all the tooling teams for these reviews. And I can be in that process, like on decision making on when it's ready to merge. Just because I think that I remain the person that's actually connecting all those teams and deciding what is the common agreement around particular spec. And everyone else can be just reviewer. Or if you suggest that there should be more people, then we can actually reach out to every single client team and say, please suggest this one person that would be familiar with this and would be ready to add documentation for those spec and be responsible for communication within the team.
So I think to begin with, creating a folder in ETH1 spec repo should not be a challenge. We can go ahead and create that folder. And if you would want to, write the first initial documentation for this, that would be great. And on the development part, as you mentioned, that maybe resources needed. Actually, I was approached by someone to kind of fund these kind of activities. So I'm wondering if we have someone in mind already who is the developer for this, or maybe the funding needed for this particular development and documentation part.
So I'd like to underline that funding actually is not an issue here. It's more about finding the people that are ready to work specifically on writing with all the support of actual resolving the questions, finding answers to the questions of how the things, what should be described. So it's this like maybe a bit more entry level task. There's a person that is exploring JSON RPC or works more like with JSON RPC, but not exactly as a developer of the implementation. And it's ready to work with developers and ask questions for clarification, work with me and ask where some additional input is needed.
Sounds good. We will try to spread word around this for the requirement, and if we have someone, we'll send it to you. What are the thoughts of other people here on this, like having the access and a folder on the ETH1 spec repo?
Who is the
Sounds good
current
to me.
admin of ETH 1.0 specs?
Oh, I'm an admin of ETH 1.0 specs.
Okay. So we do have someone here that can actually make these
Yeah.
changes. And
Yes.
do work.
Same here.
Okay.
Oh yeah, Tim can do it too. Either one of us, or
Excellent.
Pooja too. Pooja's an admin.
Mhm. So yeah, for the next steps, I'm gonna go ahead and create the folder for JSON RPC spec, and we can start working on it. Tomas, if you would like to start, kind of the first thing, the README or the documentation that is needed, we can start from there and see how different clients collaborate and try to add stuff there. Does that sound okay to everyone?
Sure, yeah, I've prepared the EIP version of it, so I'll try to move it one-to-one to this folder. If you have any preference for the actual format, then let me know. Otherwise, I just follow the format of EIP, even as it's formally will not be an EIP, but I'll just use the template.
EIP template sounds fine to me because it is not living on the EIP repository. I don't think it should be an issue here. It can be in any way that is preferred and easy to maintain. Obviously, we are expecting it to be updated with the help of pull requests. So whatever template we decide on the first should be okay.
Right.
So if it was me, which is not, I would actually model it off of the ETH 2.0 specs repo rather than EIPs. I believe if you take a look at their repository, they basically have markdown files, which are just specifications. Like they don't have, motivation sections and rationale and security considerations. They just have a spec, and it makes it a lot less wordy, a lot faster to iterate on, and generally just easier on everybody.
I think also worth noting that when the merge happens, or before the merge happens, we're going to want to merge those actual repos. So doing stuff that's in line with the ETH2 specs repo is probably future proof. As I suspect, the ETH2 specs repo is much more fleshed out than the ETH1 specs repo, so that's probably the one that we'll model everything off of.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, this is one thing that I would need the most support with. Like, just be very, very clear on when it should land. This feels very vague. Since that last meeting when we were told that EIP is not a good place, it feels like we are suggested not to use EIP, but there is no clear information maybe on where to go. So if it's ETH 1.0 spec, then I would love to see also the roadmap of how exactly it will be transitioning to ETH 2.0, the ETH 2.0, and when we can expect some decisions here.
That roadmap does not exist yet. So I guess, well, yeah, I would not block your efforts on that. I think the ETH 1.0 specs probably make sense to use right now. Adopting, a format that's similar to ETH2 is, likely a good idea, but there's not like an official, I don't know, roadmap or plan about when we transition that yet.
I see a comment from Micah about the folder. It's like ETH1.0 specs/interfaces/application/JSON RPC. So if we want to have these many subfolders in that, it's fine.
The idea there is just that over time we have the Beacon client, which will have its own set of public-facing interfaces. We'll have the application client, which will have its own set of public-facing interfaces. Some of those are JSON RPC, some of those are REST. I think it would be good to just kind of, from an organizational standpoint, Of course, we can move things later. So if someone just wants to throw it in the root for now, we can always move it later. Not a huge deal. It's just trying to future-proof a little bit there.
Yeah, I think anyways, when we merge the repos, we're going to have a bunch of like wrangling to do. So I think it's fine to have JSON RPC as a top level folder for now. There's no.
Sure. I definitely wouldn't block that.
Yeah.
So it's a file like eth1.o-specs/JSON RPC.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And the only small thing, so right now I'm looking at the eth1 specs repo, and it's really focused around network upgrades and whatnot, like the main README. So I can update that like once we have the PR for JSON RPC, I can update the README to just make it a bit more general and mention that network upgrades are only one of the things that's being tracked here.
Yeah, that was another point I was about to mention, that we might have to update the README, because initially when we started, we only thought of network upgrades, so we wrote accordingly, but now we are including more stuff. We'll may have to add some stuff there. Thanks. Okay. I think if we are good on this part, we can go ahead for the next topic. And obviously, I'm going to connect with you, Tomas, offline and see if there is anything needed more on this.
Thank you so much. Perfect.
Moving on, the next topic on the agenda is EIPs and network upgrade process requirement. There is an issue linked to this item. So we discussed this item in the last meeting, and people seem to be in agreement of the format that I proposed in the comment section. Like when it is CFI, it is in draft. When it is DevNet, it would be for review. And the mainnet phase, it will be last call. EIPs will be marked as final only if it is deployed on the mainnet. Tim has left a couple of comments. So on that part, he mentioned about removal of the testing green light thing, and instead of that, he suggested to add, reword it differently. I'm trying to find out my issue. So yeah, if people have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm looking for the issue right now, but basically the testing green light phase does not exist. So there is no testing green light. So I don't think it makes sense to have that. And then, yeah, I think the time to move EIPs to last call is when we agree on a list of EIPs for a hard fork. Like, we don't want them to be already on the testnet. We want to say, like, look, this is the London hard fork. It's EIPs 1, 2, 3, 4. Clients are going to put out a release with block numbers for this. Then the EIP should absolutely go into last call.
So that would mean the DevNet phase. Here, I'll post the issue.
Yeah, the DevNet would be review.
DevNet would go into public testnet then.
Yes, exactly.
I like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm also in total agreement that the EIP green light does not make much more sense here. So we can simply remove that section. And yeah, I'm fine with that. So what basically we are saying is, like, when it is in CFI, then only it will be in draft or review. When it moves to DevNet, it has to be in review or last call.
No, it has to be in review.
Okay.
And then we move it to last call when we decide basically the fork block numbers and when we're sure that it's going into a fork on mainnet.
Tim, we had a long conversation, I think either 1 or 2 EIPIP meetings ago, about what last call means by definition and what the colloquial definition of last call is. How do you define last call?
People should look at this right now because it's about to go on mainnet.
Which can changes happen during last call?
I mean, they can happen, but I guess the burden to change is pretty high, right?
Okay. I was under the impression that last call meant changes can go in because usually people don't look at it until last call. But if enough people want to, if the definition is different than how I'm thinking about it, I'm cool with that. And we can go ahead and make last call like a, really, this is the final time to look at it instead of changes can go in.
And I guess the reason why I'd be, I would agree with you in theory, but in practice, we don't even move stuff. Like we didn't move the EIPs for Berlin to last call until 2 of the testnets had already forked, right? Like, so it's still a net improvement if we agree to move it to last call when we set the fork blocks.
As long as the definition on EIP 1 starts to say that last call means only the most urgent of changes such as security can do things, so not like nominal changes. And then I guess the other piece is, should the last call mean the same thing for ERCs as well? Because I know we're talking about, just mainnet EIP, but this
So I
doesn't
think,
affect the definition of ERC last call.
I think the definition in EIP1 is pretty good. Like it says, this is the final review window for an EIP before moving to final. An EIP editor will assign last call status and set a review end date, typically 14 days later. If this period results in necessary normative changes, it will revert the EIP to review, which I mean, it's general enough that like it works for mainnet and ERCs.
Okay. And what's normative mean or what do we think normative means? Because to me that means like any changes.
So it just means once something's final, you cannot do changes that change the meaning of the document. So in the case of technical specifications, you cannot change the protocol that you're working on. However, you could make an edit to fix a typo, or you can make an edit to improve some wording or something like that. You just can't change the content itself. Like it still has to say the same message.
Unless there's a security vulnerability that we need to then, throw a Hail Mary and revert things, or if there's a typo. Got it. Okay.
Well, once something's final, security vulnerabilities require a new EIP. Like let's say.
Oh no, I'm talking about last call.
Yeah.
Last call, you could do non-normative changes in last call.
Yeah. But okay. That's the thing. Yeah. It says they have to be like necessary, and necessary is a very vague term. Like I think we all have like an agreement based on, the core devs process, like what's necessary and what's not. And it's quite murky to define beyond that. So I'm fine leaving it pretty general.
Okay. I'm okay with that too, then, if everyone else is okay with that. Yeah, that sounds good to me. So we're getting rid of testing green light. Mainnet phase will literally just be mainnet, and everything else will be devnet phase unless it's CFI applied.
No, I mean, are we moving the public testnet to devnet phase? No.
I thought we were. Maybe not.
So public testnet should be in last call, because we have to set, the fork blocks, before we do the public testnets.
I'm talking about the black box phases that are under the thing.
So I think we just removed testing green light, basically.
Okay, yeah. So public testnet will be on the mainnet phase. It's just that the review status would be last call. And for mainnet, it is already final. So everything is fine. If we just need to get rid of the testing green light box here, right?
Yes, and then you remove the review as well, right?
Obviously.
Because,
that review part was basically because of the existing of this testing green light.
Exactly.
Okay, fine. I'll update that sheet.
Yeah, I think that looks just fine, everyone.
If you can update that and post a comment in the issue, I'll just bring it up pretty quickly on all core devs at the next call, so people are just aware that we did the change.
Sure. So also one important change that we discussed in one of the earlier meetings, that last call, which was for 14 days only, this is not going to be 14 days only. It is minimum of 14 days. So that is one change. And the other change is testing green light has to be removed, and status should be last call.
Sounds good.
Cool. So if we are good on this, we can go ahead on the next item, but probably we can skip on that because Alita is not here and she already left a comment.
Question.
Yeah, like client.
So I was wondering, is the purpose of considered for is CFI kind of meaning that core devs expect that to go into a hard fork, or is it something good going into a hard fork?
That's
Like, does that distinction make sense?
So I just put up an issue for that yesterday on the Encore devs. Oh,
Oh, looks like it's machine talking connected every time.
So, all right, so it just wants to keep connecting to my phone. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
yes,
we can
now
hear
we
you
can
now.
hear you. Yeah, do you want to go again? We kind of missed the second
Okay.
half of what you were saying.
Yeah. No, I think I got most of it out. I'm just trying to understand, like, what is the true meaning of CFI? That is planned to go into the next hard fork, or is it something that core devs are amenable to eventually hard fork?
So my point of view on this is so much context changes during forks that the status should probably reset every fork. Because like otherwise we end up carrying a bunch of old EIPs as CFI and it kind of doesn't mean anything anymore. I was looking, and I was looking yesterday at the ones that got basically CFI'd before Berlin that didn't make it into Berlin. And frankly, you know, they're all irrelevant. The only one that's relevant is at 2537, and that got brought back into Berlin. So, you know, we could just like CFI it again. So that's kind of I guess my read of it would be, it's like, you know, generally positive towards having this in the upcoming hard fork. You know, that doesn't guarantee inclusion. And I think by default, it should reset between forks, and, you know, the bar for it to to become CFI again is just somebody stepping up and saying, I want to champion this for this fork. So it doesn't have to be like a huge bar, but at least we know there's still some interest. We know that the proposal is still relevant. Because like, for example, you had 2711, which was sponsored transactions, which is basically superseded by 3074, right? And it makes sense for, you know, 2711 to just like not be CFI anymore, and like, you know, for 3074 to be, because that's the new one you're championing.
Yeah, that all makes sense. I think like the main reason for asking this is that, you know, my experience here with 3074 has kind of been, and I think this is like something that's going to be general with EIPs that aren't brought by, you know, basically by like a core team, is that, you know, it's really important to have people look at it, but it's really hard to get people to look at it without a stamp of approval that's going into a hard fork, or like some sort of something that says it's beyond just a spec that someone came up with last week, right? And so to me, it felt like maybe CFI is that thing, and I'm trying to understand if that is the case, where you bring it into all core devs and you say, here's a change that I want to make. I'm wanting to champion it for this fork. And core devs say, yeah, that makes sense. We could see it go into this fork. Maybe here are some things that need to be done to make it happen. Like, you need to have some support. You need to do an audit, whatever. But we'll move it to CFI. That way it has the stamp of approval that you can go to the community and say, look, is this something that core devs like are amenable to having in the fork? I need support from the community.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I think that is the
I agree with that.
CFI approved. So when it is like approved by the core devs, they said that, okay, this and this changes we can expect, and then it will be included in the fork. That is the DevNet phase when we say it's CFI approved, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's approved by the core devs to be CFI.
So what's the stage for we agree it's going in the hard fork?
I think that's after, right? It's like, and this is kind of the murky one where, like, you know, we have the dev nets and whatnot, and we at the end kind of have a feel for what do we want to put in the actual fork.
Okay.
And it's kind of, London has been weird in that regard. Like for Berlin, we had everything CFI, then we did the dev nets, and then we kind of picked and choose what we wanted in the fork. London, we kind of went the other way around because we kind of knew 1559 was going to drive the fork. And 1559 had been CFI'd like, you know, 2 years ago or something. So like 1559 went right in, and the difficulty bomb as well. And now we have like other stuff that we're looking to, you know, also add in the dev nets, but we haven't made a decision about whether they're in the fork or not. So it's a bit murky.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, it seems like it's how I was understanding it. maybe in the future we can have like a little bit more process around, you know, like when something is CFI, like I think that it should be okay for something to be CFI if it's contingent on something being done. Like 3074 is
Yes.
kind of contingent on this audit. And I
Agreed.
think that it's okay for things like that to be CFI, but there would need to be a place to say like this is CFI and it's contingent on X, Y, and Z.
Agreed. Yeah, and we don't have a good place to track that right now. Like, or at
Yeah.
least we don't have a good place to track what's the decision criteria, right?
Yeah, and we can come up with that at some point.
Yeah.
Just bring it up now. It doesn't necessarily have to be done this week.
Yeah. But yeah, I generally agree.
Cool.
That's some good discussion here on CFI. So yeah, we can come back on the criteria that we would try to document somewhere, maybe to define which proposals can be considered for it or not. Okay, so we are very close to the time. We have one last item that we quickly want to check on, that is progress on canonical source for EIPs. I'm not sure, Brent, do you have it?
Yeah, we've got a staging site up now. I'm going to paste that URL in the chat thing, and we made a slight change. We're still, and so you can go to there, and it's a mirror, a staging mirror, and so we're learning how to modify and keep that up to date. But other than that icon up on the top of the page, we haven't made any changes yet. But anyway, making progress. It's kind of slow. And also I had the question, how are changes made to the ethereum.org? Because some of this, I think we're going to want to get some changes into ethereum.org. Is that something we contact? Yeah, how does that manage?
With Ethereum.org, it's an open source repo in GitHub. So you just do a pull request there and then get one of the writers to review it.
Oh, okay, cool. That's what and do you guys have the repository for that?
I can find it and send it to you, but I think it's just Ethereum.org.
Okay, I'll look for that.
Paste it in channel.
Okay. Okay, cool. Thanks a bunch. That's all I had.
Okay, that sounds good. The last item is discussing about earlier decision items and action items. So I'm just gonna quickly run over it. So see if we missed on anything. CFI draft definite review, those were the decision. We already discussed it today. Split editorship between ERCs and EIPs, split out these separate repos. We haven't covered the editorship part yet, but we did some discussion on the splitting of the repos. Allow bot to fail if it was going to merge to be turned on at a later date. I am not sure if it is related to EIP bot.
So on that one, we need, in order to turn the bot on, we need someone with admin access to be around when we do that. And so we've been struggling to coordinate with the admin of the EIP's repo to get that enabled. That's the #1 holdup right now.
Okay, do you have, like any leads on that, or if we may look into it?
I think Hudson's an admin and James is an admin. I don't know who else.
To which repo?
The EIP repo?
Yeah. Oh, no, Micah, you are now an admin, so is Alita, so am I.
Oh, okay. Then we'll take care of that then. I didn't know we got powers.
Yeah, I forgot to text it, or I might have typed it and then didn't hit enter. I forgot.
Cool, so we got it solved. The next decision was around for JSON RPC. So we discussed it today. Create a new repository that's just for interface instead of migrating to E2 specs repo. I think we are moving in a different direction, so that's fine. And action items, deciding on number system between ERCs and EIPs. I am not sure if we have made a decision on that, but I'm sure Alita, Light Client, and Micah can be working on that, and we'll see. We'll see how this number system has to be considered. Action 2, create an issue in EIPIP repo to separate ERC and EIP's repos. Yeah, Hudson has already created an issue. Maybe whatever decision we take on numbering system or moving ahead with this process, we can keep on adding that as a comment. So that's all for this meeting today. Does anyone have anything else to bring it up? Well, thank you everyone for joining today. See you all in 2 weeks. Have a great day, evening.
Bye.
Yeah, thanks all.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.